I've come to appreciate that my personal relationship with selling, and this is what I try to preach, is that it's a game. It can be a lot of fun if you choose to make it fun. It can be an adventure if you choose to make it an adventure. It certainly doesn't have to be a grind.
What would the world look like if people felt like they mattered? Welcome to the Lead with Love podcast, exploring what it means to lead with love in business and life. I'm your host, Jada Selner, and in this show, I'll share meaningful conversations to help you, the creative, the entrepreneur, the world changer, reach more people, go after your dreams, and serve your community with love. I appreciate you joining me. Now, let's get cozy and start today's episode. How can you delight the people you want to help? If you want to create experiences for the people you serve where they remember you and feel something, then this episode of the Lead with Love podcast is for you. In today's conversation, I get cozy with my dear friend, Matthew Kimberley, and we talk about selling, speaking on stages, and creating a life and business based on what you value the most. Matthew helps small business owners enjoy more fun, freedom, flow, which I am all about. He is the creator of Professional Persuasion, Delightful Emails, and the Single Malt Mastermind. He has also spent time as the head of the Book Yourself Solid School of Coach Training. He hosts the How to Get a Grip podcast and wrote a book of the same name, How to Get a Grip. He lives in Malta with 2 kids, 1 wife, and 1 dog, and you can follow his delightful words over at MatthewKimberley.com. That is MatthewKimberley.com. Now, let's get cozy with Matthew. Hello, Matthew Kimberley.
Thank you for having me, Jada. I've been looking forward to this for my entire life.
Oh, I love that. I'm so excited that we're having this conversation. I actually did a little inbox digging to find out, like, when was the first time that we connected? And I know we officially met in person in the Philippines at Chris Ducker's Tropical Think Tank event, but Joanna Galveo actually was the one who introduced us via email first, letting us know
Is that right? I didn't know.
Yes. So I believe it was like July 2015 and it was 2016, the beginning of 2016 when we met in person. And I just thought, oh, it's so delightful.
Well, the pleasure was entirely mine. What struck me about you, Jada, was your poise and your presence. And that's as true today as it was then.
Thank you. And I remember we were both speaking at Tropical Think Tank in Cebu, and I was just so enamored by your stage presence, just your ability to really pull people in. You pull in a bit of theatricality and also so much just strategy at the same time. So I definitely want to dive into just your approach to that. But before we get into your body of work and what you're up to in the world, I always ask, what does leading with love mean to you? And how do you put love into practice in your business?
Great questions. Leading with love, Jada. I'm a reluctant leader. I'm not somebody who fits necessarily very snugly into the role of leader because I've always sought approval. Right. So that comes into the theatrical things. What does every actor, which is a background I have, every performer have in common? It's that they may be desperately miserable or introverted or however they are behind the scenes. When they're on stage, they're looking for the applause. They want the plaudits. They want the positive critical reviews. And so I think partly because of that, being a leader who has to say to people, follow me, whether you like it or not, has always come unnaturally. So I guess to mitigate against that, to lead with love, I've always sought the followers who are there under their own steam, through their own volition, and people who have chosen me rather than me necessarily suggesting that they should follow me, I really, really want them to put their hands up enthusiastically and say, I've seen you with your pants off, metaphorically, warts and all. I like the look of what I see. I recognize the humanity of you, and I recognize your failings as well as your strengths, and I'm happy to be with that. So I am desperately keen to never, because of that, I never want to insult the intelligence of the people that I'm leading, whether I'm leading them through a marketing funnel or a sales conversation or a paid program or from the stage. I think respecting the intelligence, emotional intelligence, academic intelligence, worldly intelligence of the people who are in your world is critical to me. That I hadn't given much thought to leading with love before you asked me. But I think if I can respect people and their intelligence, that's the way that I express love in my family and friend-based relationships as well. It's a deep-seated respect for the other person, and keeping that in firmly at the forefront of all interactions.
Can you give me an example of how you respect, their emotional intelligence, academic intelligence? I'm so curious to kind of visualize how you do that.
Absolutely. So this is, well, let me give you two very practical examples. When I'm writing, I've studied copywriting, as I know you have, and many people listening to this will also have studied some form of copywriting, whether that's how to write an email or how to write a sales page or how to be persuasive in Facebook ads or whatever that might be. We're often taught that we should write like a fourth grader. Right? Because it scans better, because it's easier to digest and it's easier to process. And I say, well, screw that. If I know a long word, there's a very strong possibility that most other people also know that long word. And also the people who are right for me also know that wrong word. So I'll never choose a fourth grade word if a 12th grade word is more appropriate. That's one very classic example. I'm always very mindful of that. Another example is when I'm working with my clients, my coaching clients, I try so hard not to be didactic. I never say you should do this. I always say, or I always try to say, you've got the following options. And the number of times I find myself saying, I don't know, but what's the harm in testing? I don't know, but why don't we try this? Rather than, no, you need this funnel, you need this piece of software, you need this particular script for selling, you need this particular approach, you need to go to this event. Also in my sales conversations, I'll say, look, the ball is, even though I practice or preach a program called professional persuasion. Persuasion is a bit of a dirty word. So persuasion to me is a bit more icky actually than presenting opportunity. And when the prospect of closing comes up, well, I am far more comfortable with, and many of my clients are far more comfortable with there's always a time and place for closing, but putting the main focus and most of our energy on opening opportunities, opening doors, finding prospects, presenting the prospects, rather than closing hard. They have high levels of emotional intelligence. They know what they like and what they don't like. And so I try to make life easy for them. Now, there comes a time when leading with love, I guess, also has to be getting them off the fence, because the fence isn't a very comfortable place to be. So I think you get splinters in your butt and you don't move in one direction or another. So part of my role is also to say, okay, enough prevarication. Here are your options. Do you want me to make a choice for you? And we can run with this until we exhaust ourselves or we change our minds. That's also a form of respect. It's like getting your kids to brush their teeth in the morning. I don't feel like it. I don't know. Yeah, but if you don't do it, it's not in your best interest. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And I'm curious, we talked a little bit earlier about this. You used the word gentle marketing. And so I'm really fascinated by your approach of, one, what is your personal relationship with sales? Is it something that you love? And if so, when did that love affair start? Just curious what your personal relationship is to sales, because you are very good at it from the stage, on a page, in face-to-face conversation. So just curious what that relationship is for you.
Well, thank you very much. And I guess in an ideal world, I'm not one of those people who adores selling. I have a healthy respect for money and the need for money and the opportunities and safety net that money gives you. But I've said this probably on stage even a couple of times. I've always felt like the odd one out in a lot of these, probably like you actually, John, in a lot of these high-level masterminds that I attend and you attend, where people are obsessed with their next 8-figure exit or their 3,000th recurring customer. I admire that and I respect that. And I just can't find myself comfortably saying, yeah, me too. I can't do it. So in an ideal world, I wouldn't have to sell. People would just write me a check and I'd get to be brilliant and swan around and probably have a whiskey every evening in an ideal world. But because I've been in sales my entire life, really, bar a couple of years in civil service government administration, which was dreadful, I've come to appreciate that my personal relationship with selling, and this is what I try to preach, is that it's a game. It can be a lot of fun if you choose to make it fun. It can be an adventure if you choose to make it an adventure. It certainly doesn't have to be a grind. Unless you're homeless or about to be homeless, the stakes are never as high as we think they are. Your prospect can enjoy it. I like the challenge of the relationship. Now, I did cold calling for years and years and years, and people hate cold calling, and so did I. Nobody's telling the truth if they say they love cold calling. But if the default is I'm calling someone who doesn't want to hear from me and they're going to tell me to get lost, what if that wasn't true? What if we could call someone and they actually ended up enjoying their conversation with you? And that was always my challenge to myself, and it is today. I think through the correct application of connection, which it comes back down to empathy and emotional intelligence, and exercising control over the process and realizing, frankly, that the stakes aren't that high, you can enjoy a lot more fun and therefore success in selling. And so I try to keep it as fun as possible and always all cards on the table. If I'm having a sales conversation with somebody, it always begins with, call for a free consultation. I would never do that. It would always be, if you want to work with me, schedule a call, because that's more honest, right? So they join and I go, right, just to be clear, very first thing I say, hi, small talk. So just so we're on the same page, thank you for being here. The purpose of today's conversation is to work out whether or not we're going to work together. Am I right? And they'll say yes. And that gets all of the awkwardness out of the way and it allows you to have fun.
I love that. That's so simple and so perfect. And I love the making it an adventure and enjoying the process of the challenge and making a game out of it. Is there a specific strategy or habit or just a way that you approach in making it feel fun for you?
I use numbers to keep score. I definitely use that dollar figure to keep score. I think that's quite fun. I've used various iterations of this exercise, but I've had 100 Post-it notes up on my office wall, and every time I make $1,000, I cross one out with a large Sharpie until I can, I have a visual representation of whether I'm on track to hit some of my goals. I've certainly done a lot of that. And it's easy. I realize also, Jada, it's easy for me to say the stakes aren't that high and it can be fun. And that's come with 2 decades of experience at the coalface, realizing that even when I was in the depths of despair, it was all right in the end. I think if you believe, if you know how to say thank you and you're not afraid to do the dishes and you invest a little bit in relationships, if you're the kind of person who's listening to this, it would be very, very unfortunate if you were to end up homeless. And that's pretty much the worst thing that can happen, right?
Yeah. Well, I had my worst case scenario was living with my in-laws for 6 months. And I rebuilt from there with my daughter by my side and my husband, and we figured it out. And so there's always, not always, but, just looking at worst case scenario, there's usually a safe place for you to land even when you fall.
Absolutely. And that's one of the mottos that I've preached for related to that. One of the mottos I've preached for a very long time is, what's the worst that can happen and can I live with it? And that could be used for the positive as well. I was having a conversation just earlier on today with a client of mine who was talking about branding. And she has a fantastic program to help ladies manage their money better so they don't get to the end of the month and it's all disappeared. And she's tried various names and the offer is very solid. And she said the problem is people aren't really paying attention because it's a very, very competitive marketplace. Earn and keep more money. As you know, Jada, from your experience online, there are three main things that we sell. We're either selling more money, better health, or better relationships. Get rich, get ripped, and get laid. And so it's a it's the triumvirate of power and of marketing. And so I said, well, how about if you went balls out with your branding? What if instead of, I don't want to reveal any client confidential stuff now, but what about instead of the name that you've currently given it, you call it Make Money Your Bitch? Because that was very in tune with her, because that's the kind of language that she uses. And she said, well, could I? I said, well, it would certainly make people pay attention, or something like that. It would certainly make people pay attention. It would certainly be on brand for you. And critically, what's the worst that happened if you sent an email to your list tomorrow and said, hey, I'm running a 2-hour workshop called Make Money Your Bitch. You can test it quick and easily. You'll lose the prudes and you'll attract more of the right people. So what's the worst that can happen is a fantastic question to ask yourself repeatedly.
Yeah. And I love the latter part of, and can you live with it?
Yeah, of course. That's critical.
Yeah. So something that you do really well that inspires me is you speak around the world. I know right now you are in Malta.
Sunny Malta in the Mediterranean.
Yeah. And I have had the privilege of meeting you in the Philippines and New York and London. So I know that you travel around the world, and just curious if you could take me back to your very first speaking engagement.
Oh, man.
Because you're so excellent today. And I'm like, where were you in that first moment?
I tell you, so I had a background in theatre, high school theatre. I was the guy we were lucky enough in the high school I went to have the town's theatre on our school grounds. It was a fully equipped, professionally run theatre with full-time AV crew, lighting crew, 3 members of the theatrical department staff looked after us. There was 2 or 3 opportunities to be on stage every term, every school term, and I was always there every single term. I was the standby. I was very good at memorizing lines. So if one of the Shakespearean characters got sick a week before the curtain was due to go up, they'd draft me in because they knew I could learn the lines because I was so keen to impress and because I loved it, right? So I was always very comfortable on stage. And then one of my earliest jobs ever was street performer. I used to juggle for money in the street. And so I was never afraid of talking to crowds. That was always part and parcel. And then I was given the opportunity. And then I went off and got into sales and started my own recruitment company in Belgium, became the CEO of a technology recruitment firm, which was kind of out of sync with where I wanted to be. And then took a decade off, I guess, performance until I started working with Michael Port at Book Yourself Solid. So he gave me my first experience of coaching, I guess. I joined I sold my share in the recruitment company and I became a certified Book Yourself Solid coach, and then ended up doing workshops with Michael. And every now and again he'd say, get up and do this bit and get up and do this bit. And he would encourage me and he'd say, you're so good on stage. And I remembered how much I enjoyed it and how much I liked it. And then one thing led to another, and through relationships and through opportunities and through putting myself out there, I realized I should probably craft my own keynote. And it was all through relationships. A friend of mine who I'd known back from my recruitment days ended up by pure coincidence running an events management company in London. He said, do you want to come and speak? I said, yes. And there it was, 90 minutes on stage to a paying audience. And it was an experience that continues to repeat. I've also played at selling from the stage, which I enjoy less, but will do if I have to. And the reason I enjoy it less is because the experience for the the audience must be different. If you want them to run to the back, like selling directly from stage, like I have an offer for you today, fill in the order form now. In order to get them off their seats to fill in the form, you have to leave them, I believe, and I may be flawed in my belief, you have to leave them slightly dissatisfied. Like, let me show you the itch, and let me show you the only way to scratch the itch is by buying my thing. It's an art. Some people do it phenomenally well. I have no ethical problem with it when it's done ethically. But it's very different to the experience that the performer or the paid speaker wants to give the audience, which is to leave them 100% entirely satisfied at the end of the presentation. And I think that does adjust your relationship with the audience. If I knew more, if I studied it more or thought about it, I may find that those two things aren't that far apart.
Right.
But it's my excuse for whenever I underperform on stage for a sales gig. That's always my excuse. I'll throw my arms in the air and say, "Well, what do you expect, darling? I'm a paid speaker. I'm a performer, not a salesman."
Yes. So one quick question that I have, and I have a couple of other curiosities, is just around what is your memorization techniques?
Oh, goodness. So and it's been a long time since I've had to remember anything like by rote, but I did a couple of things. I would always write everything out longhand at least twice. I found that the physical act of writing things out longhand really helped. And do you remember cassette tapes?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I used to record everybody else's parts, like the people who you were bouncing off, and leave gaps. So I could listen to, let's say, a play that I was appearing in. I'm such a diva. A play that I was appearing, let's say it was 90 minutes long, but my scenes may have been 45 minutes of that. I could listen to that 7 or 8 times during a day, over the weekend or in the evening with my headphones on and my Walkman, and I'd have that monologue in my head, and also leaning on the crutch, not being afraid to use your notes until you realize that you don't need them anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's okay to have your book in your hand until you don't need it. But I still to this day have nightmares about not knowing my lines. Like nightmares. This is a recurrent nightmare I have. I'm on stage. It's a big deal. I know that I haven't learned my lines because I willfully didn't study them. And it's my version of being naked at school. Yeah. It's being on stage without my lines to this day. Kills me.
And when you're, for a speaking presentation, you're solo. So there's no one, to have their audio recorded. So what do you do when you're preparing for your own speaking?
Right. So rehearsal is absolutely critical. And if anybody is interested in being a true performer, I think some of the best training in the world today, if not the best training in the world, is at Heroic Public of New Hope, Pennsylvania. They do in-person, hands-on, write with you, perform with you, rehearse with you. Rehearsal is absolutely critical. Most performers like you or I have 1, maybe 2, maximum 3 presentations that they give over and over again. So it would be highly unusual for me to craft something from scratch for an audience.
Yeah.
One of the Tropical Think Tank, I went the year, I think you were there the second time I spoke.
Yeah, and you were the winner the year before.
No, well, I was the winner the year before.
Yeah.
And then the second year, Chris told me very secretly many years afterwards, he said, well, actually, you were so close to winning the second year as well. I said, I'm so glad that I didn't, because I've only got 2 speeches. And I didn't want to have to write a third because it wouldn't be as good, right? Because I wouldn't have had the opportunity to practice. And the best place to rehearse is in front of an audience. And so what I found is, particularly the more you give it, the more you memorize it, the easier it flows. I think any true performer should be able to have a complete AV failure, like your slides don't work, and you should still be able to continue nonetheless.
That just happened to me.
And you managed?
Yeah, I was really pissed, but
yeah.
But I'm like, oh yeah, I know this talk.
Yeah, that's it. You know the talk after a while. And because I was teaching, so the first thing I was teaching was Book Yourself Solid for years and years. That's a series of set pieces. That's so well, the information is so well organized within Book Yourself Solid, as it should be within any kind of presentation or performance, that I was able to riff. And when you know your stuff really well, you can... I was having this conversation with, I think, Phil Jones from Exactly What to Say fame was explaining this to me, and also Ron Tite, who's another fantastic speaker. If you speak enough, you can start to hang your talk or the main points of your talk around some anchors. So if you look over somebody who speaks regularly and sometimes does adapt, has to adapt elements of their talk, or someone who does workshops as well as keynotes, as well as maybe in-depth roundtable style stuff, they've got bits that they can talk about, rather like a comedian has bits, and they don't have the entire joke written out, but they have the theme. So it's very common to see me now deliver a full one-day workshop with an index card of notes. There'll be 9 bullet points. Like, we're going to talk about that, and I know that I've got 25 minutes of talk, and then we bring it to the table, and then we can talk about that point, and then we go in this direction. So it's like anything. If you do it twice or 3 times or 4 times, you're probably not going to be very good. But if you do it hundreds of times, you can expect to get better if you're thoughtful about it.
Yeah. And I love that you talk about the rehearsing in front of an audience. I'm actually a pretty bad rehearser behind the scenes. So all of my rehearsing has just happened on stages. I'd like to work on that a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, this is directly from Michael. You know, Michael and I worked together at Book Yourself Solid, and then Heroic Public Speaking was born while I was still working there. And this was something that he banged on about incessantly. He says, you cannot rehearse in front of a mirror, because you cannot be the judge of what's going to work and what's not.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I've been okay then.
you can memorize your lines at home, but if you really want to rehearse, there's nowhere like in front of an audience.
Yeah. And I love that we both have the theater background, but just how you took the 10-year break from performing. And I did something very similar. I had my daughter, and just like I did spoken word poetry, and then I just stopped. But now I've tied in spoken word poetry into my keynote presentations. And I've seen you tie in your juggling from your street performer days into your keynote presentations, which I think it's fascinating that we can bring these elements of our earlier performer days that brought us so much joy and that full creative expression into a more professional environment when we're sharing our messages on the stage.
Right. I can't wait to have fun. I'm taking about 4 months off from scheduled activity this summer, partly to spend time with my kids, but also partly because I want to write some stuff, and I want to make some stuff. And so no coaching calls, basically nothing in the calendar. By default, there will be exceptions. But a couple of things. When I was 17, I wrote a 45-minute 2-man play entirely in rhyming couplets. And I was so proud of it, and I've lost it now. And I can only remember sections of it, but I'd like to go and do something like that again. Could I deliver a 45-minute keynote which rhymes? And can I have a whole section of it where I'm doing a Dr. Seuss style thing? I was reading my kid Cat in the Hat before he went to bed last night, or one of the Dr. Seuss books. And I thought it would be so much fun to have a 5-minute bit in my keynote where, talk about how would, sales is child play. How would Dr. Seuss teach sales? Well, I think it would look something like this, and go into the, this is the germ of a creative idea, and I hope it comes to something, but I think that comes directly from my theatre background as well.
Yes, that sounds so delightful. I'm just like grinning from ear to ear, because that would be, I want to see that.
Right.
And you talked about, you worked with Michael Port, and you were the head of Book Yourself Solid, and you've made a pivot from that into creating some really, really cool projects. And I'm just curious what inspired you to make that pivot, to step away and really go all in on your own projects. Because I know one of the things that you say on your website is that you are the entrepreneur's secret weapon, and you're actually behind the scenes of some pretty epic marketing campaigns. And so I have a lot of curiosity around, kind of shifting from that collaboration partnership into your own body of work.
I'm a brat, Jada. So I get restless, and I kind of, I haven't really. I just closed down my coaching program. So I wanted to take the summer off. I'm spoiled, stupid. And so when I turned to Michael after 6 or 7 years together, and I said, dude, I think now might be a good time to see if we could work together differently. And by that, he understood what I meant, because I couldn't say I'm off, right? Loyalty is one of my big things, but I was trying to broach the subject and say, how could we do this? And he said to me straight away, he said, I knew we were going to have this conversation. He said, I've known for a year that we were going to have this conversation. I was just hoping we wouldn't have it. So I was sitting on it for about a year, where it was part apprenticeship. It was part wanting to stretch myself. It was also part because I've been teaching the same thing for 5 years. Book Yourself Solid is one of the best systems out there for anybody who runs a service business to either do before they begin or revisit at any stage of their business. It's incredibly prescriptive. It's incredibly formulaic, and that is its strength. But I was teaching coaches, amongst other things, I was teaching coaches how to teach that to their clients. And I had found that I was having the same conversation 4 years in a row, every week or a few times a week. And although I wore different hats, I was operational, I was marketing, I was sales, I had lots of hats there. I just felt that I wanted a change. I fancied a change. And it coincided with the launch of Heroic Public Speaking that we'd been working on for a couple of years. And it seemed like a natural time to move. And honestly, Jada, since then, I've been pretty much on my own. There haven't been any real partnerships since then. And I often sit at my computer in my office in Malta on my own in front of my computer and think, I wonder whether I should actually team up with someone long term. Right. And I don't discount doing that again in the future, but I was very desperate to see which way I was desperate. I was really keen to see which way the wind would blow me. And also it took up a lot of time. Right. And so we were never in an exclusive partnership. Michael always encouraged me to do speaking gigs and products and projects and things on the side. And so when I stopped Book Yourself Solid, it created a vacuum which forced me to make things and create things. So I'm very glad for that, because out of that was born Professional Persuasion, the Single Malt Mastermind, the Delightful Emails program, the advisory board, all the things I've done since then, I've had fun with.
Yeah, you're a creator.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it took a little bit of time I don't even know if I'm an innate coach. Well, I've called myself coach for a long time. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Certainly my coaching clients are very happy to have had me as coach, but I don't think that's my default state. I think my default state is making things.
Yeah. And you also just recently launched How to Get a Grip podcast.
Yes. So thank you for mentioning it. So, How to Get a Grip was the name of a book I wrote when I was working as a recruitment company CEO and utterly miserable, desperate for a creative outlet. So I started writing a blog of the same name, How to Get a Grip. And it got traction. This was back in the day when not everybody was blogging and Google would still send you lots of traffic. And one day it sent me, I think, 250,000 visitors in a day. I forget the exact numbers. It may not. It may have been one of these viral sharing sites or something, but got a lot of interest, including from a publisher who said, look, would you write a book? And I said, yep, absolutely. So I wrote this book, which was advice to myself, really. Quit moaning, quit whining, get a grip on yourself, Kimberley. Such a wuss. It's a very foul-mouthed. What's the name of the Mark Manson book?
The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
That's right. So I read that recently, and Mark's book is awesome. It's so good. Mine isn't dissimilar. And I think had it come 6 years later and had a fuck in the title,
right,
I might have retired by now.
How to Get an effing grip.
It's super sweary. My dad is a priest. He's a man of the cloth. He can't gift it to people. He can't say, my son wrote a book. Would you like a copy? So the book then sold really, really well. I mean, in the UK especially, it didn't translate so well. There was never a US version, so it didn't translate very well to the US market. But it sold phenomenally. I still get royalty checks today. And then I kind of moved into sales and sales training and marketing advice, business building. And so people found me by accident through How to Get a Grip. But it never really fed what I do today. And when I read it back, it's still a very powerful book. If I wrote it today, it wouldn't be nearly as punchy. it would be a lot more delicate. Because when you're younger, you think you know everything, right? So
I wonder, I mean, one, I just love hearing that story. And I think it was 2011 when that book came out.
That's right. Yeah.
And now you have the podcast and there's this refinement. And I wonder if there's a second revision with the new branding, and it's like how to get a grip with a glass of whiskey or something. Like it would be interesting to see the 2.0 version from where you are today.
Yeah, you see, but I think I'd be specifically, distinctly unqualified to give any advice around personal development. Yeah. When I get my act together, maybe I'll think. But I thought I knew I didn't have my act together back then, but I cared less. I was happy to be shouty and young and make an impression. Although it came out in 2011, it was probably written in 2009, which was a decade ago. I was 29 years old, when that was written. Funnily enough, the podcast was originally going to be called Work and Whiskey, and I had all the branding done and the artwork and the jingles and the first dozen episodes recorded. And the day before it was due to go live, I went on on iTunes to see if it had already been released. And I found the Whiskey and Work podcast. I only found it by somebody else, fully established. I forget her name, Kelsey. Somebody has the Whiskey and Work podcast. And I realized, even though all systems would go and I'd announced it and it was ready to launch, that I had to pull it. Because if somebody's got the Whiskey and Work podcast, there's no way I can, in good faith, release the Work and Whiskey podcast. From a legal point of view, I would have been fine. But from a self-esteem and derivative point of view, I could never have lived with myself. So I had to rebrand quickly and realized that How to Get a Grip actually suited quite well, because it was all about what grinds your gears, what keeps you sane, what do you do for fun, what do you do at work, and How to Get a Grip was something that I already had some brand recognition in and already some brand equity, so I decided to roll it out again.
Yeah. Were there any fears or doubts that came up along the way in getting this podcast out into the world?
Yeah, and they still exist, actually. One of the very first interviews I did was with Jordan Harbinger, who is one of the best interviewers in the world, one of the most prolific and popular podcasters in the world, and a very good friend of mine. And I really pooped the bed. I did a terrible interview, and that will never see the light of day. And he was very gracious about it. He said, well, don't worry, no problem. It was fine. It actually wasn't as bad as you thought. I'd be happy to do it again. And my fear with the podcast is that I'm not going to be an interesting enough interviewer, and it's going to be run of the mill, because I think I would listen to anybody's conversation. These people don't have to be, I always look for people who are good talkers, right, for the production values, but they don't necessarily have to have achieved anything remarkable. If they've got an interesting take or an interesting opinion, I'd love to talk to them. But the danger is that I'm not going to be good enough. Now, I did it for two reasons. One was so that I could reconnect with friends who I'm finding less and less time for as my kids get older. The second reason is for marketing purposes. I wanted to attract new clients and give existing prospects and existing clients the opportunity to get to know me better. And that's working so far. So I'm thrilled about that. Always, always terrified that I'm going to be a bad interviewer.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that it's helpful, when we are a performer at heart and we create and put a lot of work out in the world, to just hear that behind the scenes thought process that's happening that people don't know. When we launch anything and put something out into the world, we want the applause and we would like to not have the criticism. Absolutely.
If I have a week when I don't have a review or a rating, then I do think, I want to make sure that, because it's like the applause, right? You want the feedback. You want people, you want the downloads. You want people to say, hey, I enjoyed that. Not because they matter to the business. I would do it for fun, but because they matter for fragile personalities like me. Show me an author who doesn't read their own reviews. I bet there isn't a podcaster who doesn't read their own reviews either. And we do it for the same reason that we like hearing applause at the end of our performances, because we want to know that we have done a good job. And we want that to be validated by other people.
Yeah. So how, receiving the feedback in that first interview, how do you handle that criticism and feedback when you're like, that wasn't it? How are you managing that?
Well, it normally comes from me. And because people are too polite, and also because I'm my own worst critic. I'm not a perfectionist. I've always thought that done is better than perfect, but I am worried about being boring. You know, I don't want to be the boss. From a brand equity point of view, if someone's going to pay their attention to me, I've got to reward them for that, right? Because they could go anywhere. They could listen to thousands of other podcasts. They could watch anything on TV. They could read and they could scroll through the Facebook feed, but they've decided to give their attention to me. And I feel a duty of care. Maybe this is what leading with love is, right? I feel a duty of care. So if I'm going to get criticism from someone who wants to criticize, I'm okay. I can tell them to get lost, right? This is criticism from strangers. They can get lost at any time. Even customers who say, hey, that wasn't great. I'd be like, well, you didn't have to tell me that, did you? I wouldn't have done the same to you. I would have said, fantastic, well done. Right? No, I mean, there's the humanity of it as well. So if someone wants to criticize for the hell of it, that's great. If somebody I deeply care about, if the interviewee, for example, said that wasn't very good, or a dozen people instead of just one lone voice said, that wasn't your best, then I'd take it on board. But I'm also okay to get back up again because I've done plenty of dud gigs, delivered plenty of performances or presentations which haven't landed 100%. But you have to stand up. You have to get up. You have to keep going.
Yeah.
You have to. There's no choice. And consistency is I think the marker. That's what I'm most excited about. I've recorded 25 episodes now. And once I get to 52, that's a cause for celebration. And then it will be 104 or whatever that will be. And that's because that was always a weakness in the past. I told you I'm a brat. I quit things when I get bored. So recognizing that weakness, I will keep showing up and I will keep showing up. That's my personal challenge.
Yeah. What is that fear for you around boredom?
I'm very aware of the limited amount of time that we have. I don't think boredom is ideal for anybody, right? I'm also better at okay, so here's the thing. I could be idle. Being idle doesn't bore me. I could be on my own for days with a book or a beach or even just a town to stroll around. I could be idle. That's not a problem. I don't get bored easily. But if I'm actively doing something which is boring me, like I'm doing something I don't want to be doing because I'm brattish, that's a problem. Because I'm actively investing energy into something which isn't giving me, in the short term or the long term, the outcome that I'm looking for.
What is that outcome?
Well, it could change. It could change from no matter what it may be. When I originally started my recruitment company, I was very excited, the idea of earning lots of money. I was super excited about money. And then I realized that the cost it was likely to come out in that particular environment. So I'd work 7 days a week. I'd work 7 days a week, hard. I was young. I was 25, 26. I was working every day, every weekend, long hours, cold calling, smiling and dialing, all of those things. And then my son was born and all of a sudden priorities changed. And I realized that the outcome that I had originally had in mind, which meant that the boring work that I was doing didn't bore me, the spreadsheets and the cold calls and the conversations with IT managers about how many C++ programmers they needed for their next project. I could see beyond the action to get to the outcome. It's like you've got to dig a mine if you want to discover diamonds, right? But then when my first child was born, the outcome all of a sudden, or the objective for where I was spending my energy became entirely different. And so the boring work or the dull work or the work, the day-to-day grind no longer justified the place that I would be as a result of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think that it's, you mentioned where you were feeling out of sync, unsynced with the recruitment company. And it's these intentional trade-offs that we make. And sometimes it's like, this isn't worth it anymore. It's not worth that cost of spending less time with family or not as joyful or creative. And I've definitely been in those places. And so I have a lot of curiosity around what are those indicators of change when we know we need to make a pivot in a new direction. And for you, it sounds like the signal is boredom.
Yeah.
Is one of them.
If I feel that, people talk a lot about risk and reward. And I understand that you take the greatest risk in order to get the greatest reward. But I also think there's a direct correlation between responsibility and reward. Like, if you want the reward of selling your recruitment company for 18 times EBIT to an investment fund, then you're going to take responsibility for ensuring that the billable hours are there, that the bookings are there, that the invoices are sent out. If you want the reward of a healthy old age, you've got to take responsibility for keeping yourself healthy in your youth. If you want the reward of a satisfying relationship with your children, you've got to take responsibility for parenting them in a way that you believe will end up in that outcome. And that could be considered a grind, right? So if you're not particularly interested in a rewarding relationship with your kids, then putting them, I don't know, reading them a bedtime story or making them brush their teeth or punishing them appropriately is going to be something you don't care much about. You're going to not take the responsibility for parenting them, and you're not going to get the reward of that relationship later. But the reward has to be there in order to accept the responsibility. So with recruitment, for me, the reward was no longer there. So I no longer wanted the responsibility for my day-to-day actions. That makes
Yes.
Because the reward disappeared. So my duty of taking responsibility for that reward just disappeared overnight.
So what is the reward that you are moving towards today?
Good question. I am looking to indulge my creative side. I'm really, really obsessed with space in the calendar at the moment. That's an immediate reward that I'm taking this summer. I hope to make it a greater part of my life later on a recurrent basis. And I realize that in order to do that, I need to take responsibility for my business model, which means it will be delivered in such a way that space in the calendar comes first, and operating a profitable, financially rewarding business around it has to slot in with that priority. And that's it's a very prosaic or perhaps obvious response.
I don't think so. I mean, I think we're all on that same path to create.
Sure. So I got clear about that. And that has also given me, so I always beat myself up. I told you at the very beginning of this conversation, when I'm in the room and people are talking about their 8-figure years and their 7-figure launches and their payroll of 200K a month and all of these things which we're celebrating as milestones. And I couldn't get excited about those. I think I finally made peace with that. I've been studying a couple of people, I've been more aware of a couple of people recently. One is Paul, help me out here, Company of One.
Oh, yeah, the book. Yeah, Paul Jarvis.
Paul, yes, exactly. Super impressed by his idea, better is better than bigger. No, become kind of obsessed with that. The reward should be today, right? Not tomorrow. To a certain degree, I kind of flip that idea of growth on its head. And the other gentleman is a guy called Andre Chaperon, who's based out of Gibraltar, which is another Mediterranean island. I don't think he even knows who I am, but I've been paying very careful attention to his company, tinylittlebusinesses.com, which is very much built along the same lines as Paul Jarvis's Company One, which is, you can serve a small group of people incredibly well if you are very clear about your intentions and stay true to them. And he does it specifically through email. I don't think he's ever done a call in his life, emails and products and programs and autoresponders. And there's a lot of beauty in that, especially for the creative type, like I am making peace with myself being.
Yeah. And I know that you have the delightful emails, which truly any email that I receive from you is delightful. Can you tell me a little bit about that project?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I'm really excited about that. Delightful Email solves the problem for people who end up as email marketers, people who by default are email marketers, which I hope is most service professionals who have a website. We should all be collecting emails and we should all be corresponding. And we've heard this 1,000 times. The money is in the list. The money is in the list. For almost all of my clients since day one of doing this, there's been a lot of resistance for that around emails. 3 specific areas. One, they don't sound like themselves when they write. Right? It's like you have a telephone voice. Hello, the lady of the house speaking. They have an email voice and it doesn't sound like them. They either sound like a psychopath Like, hey, click here now, yellow highlighter, bold, underlined, the most awesome thing ever. You don't want to miss it. Or they can swing too far in the opposite direction and go like really professional. Like, hello, dear friend, I hope this email finds you well. I'm terribly sorry for not having written to you for the last 3 months, but I've been busy. And there's a lot of resistance. So not sounding themselves. So I've cracked the code on developing your voice, and it's really a personal branding exercise. And people love it. So that's the first part of Delightful Emails. It's developing your voice, your vocabulary, your style guide, your world, the world in which you, the email writer, operates. The second part is they don't know what to write. Just email ideas. What I have to write to my list every week or 3 times a week or even once a month for some people is like, what do I even say? So I've got 3 or 4 very specific strategies for generating unlimited, and I've written. One of the things I do actually, Jordan, have done since the beginning of time is copywriting for myself and for other people. And so having written thousands and thousands of emails now and kind of honed this, how to create ideas that work very, very quickly. And then the third part is, I've got the idea and I've got my voice. Now what? Now I've got to write the damn thing. So how to write an email is the third part of the Delightful Emails program, which sounds like something they'd probably teach in elementary school, but it takes the act of writing an email, it breaks it down into its component parts. You actually start at the end and then you jump to the beginning and then you fill in the middle. And it's a really, really easy and eye-opening program that I've been delivering in person. It's been about 4 years that I've been teaching it. I first, and I delivered it to Todd Herman's clients, to Taki Moore's clients, to Dale Beaumont's clients a number of times, to my own clients. Then I ran the program live for 3 weeks last summer. And it was off the charts. Feedback was fantastic. And so now it's available as a self-study program that I've kind of launched it last week. And now my job this summer, I guess, is to work out how to make people buy it. Well, that's the challenge. I know, but here's the thing. I sent an email out last week or last month, and I sent one email and every single one of the 50 spots went in 2 days, which is great for my tiny list. And now it's a slightly different challenge because those people know me and love me and they believe me when I say, hey, I can do email. I can help you do emails well, because they've been on the receiving end of my emails for so long. Whereas now the challenge is people who haven't heard of me, who don't know me, how much do I have to warm them up? What do I have to show them? What do I have to tell them? It's a real fun marketing exercise that I'm deeply in at the moment. So you should do Delightful Emails. And if you do it, drop me a line first and say that Jada sent you and I'll hook you up with something special.
Yeah, I want to do it because I truly do. There is so much love and delight in how you just your copy and how you connect with the reader on the other end. So I'm like, ooh, I want to check it out.
Thank you very much. There's no learning curve. That's the beautiful thing. It doesn't teach you, you don't have to learn anything. You just have to apply a couple of things and make a couple of decisions. So it's a very short and satisfying course for everyone who's done it. Been about 130 people in at the time of speaking. And I'd like to get into the hands of 1,000 people. That's my goal.
You need your Post-its. You need your Post-its up.
Absolutely right.
So before we wrap up, I know you said there's tools to apply, but if there's one simple action step that someone could take to write a more delightful email, what would that be?
Well, I'd say there's so much I could say, but let me say this. Don't fall into the mistake of believing that every email you send has to be educational. We confound value with actionable content, because you say, if I'm going to interrupt these people, which is a whole other thing, you're not interrupting them. They've said, write to me, please. So I believe we have a duty to write to them. You don't have to give them an educational experience. If you think, Jada, about what you value the most, and if we agree that we should put out valuable content, which I do, the things that we value the most, the things that we would rescue from a burning building, are not instruction manuals. They're not cheat sheets or swipe copies or ebooks or checklists or listicles or videos. And we wouldn't rescue those. We'd rescue photos, we'd rescue records, we'd rescue favorite cuddly toys, and primarily we'd rescue like our loved ones, our friends, right? So when you are writing an email and you want to deliver value, your call to action doesn't have to be click here to learn about this. You do not have to include a how-to in the body of the email. we value emotional experiences above everything. So if you can make your person feel something, then you are providing more value to them than anyone who writes, hey, I've got a new 10 things you must consider before you post on Instagram, click through here. And it will, in the short term and the long term, make them think about you more. Even if your call to action in your email is think about that, you've done them a great service by giving them an emotional experience, which means you're going to tell them a story, you're going to share something, you're going to let them know they're not alone, you're going to let them know that they're okay, you're going to share your opinion on something. I, for one, Jada, spend an awful lot more time listening to Spotify and watching Netflix than I do reading business guides, because and I think most people are like that. I'm a huge business book geek as well, but I think most people truly demonstrate what they find valuable through where they spend their time and where they spend their money. So that's in experiences and things that elicit an emotional response. So you never, ever, ever again have to give them educational content. But if you can entertain or make them feel something, then you're doing them an enormous favor, and you will always be welcome in their inbox.
Oh, that just gives me like the hugest sigh of relief and just a beautiful reminder. And I love Maya Angelou's quote where she said that I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. So is there anything that you would like to share before we wrap up?
No, Jada, just huge gratitude for the time that you've spent speaking to me today, but also the space and time that you've created for me in your life as well. It's a true blessing to get to hang out with you now and hopefully many times in the future as well.
Yes, I'm excited to see where in the world we'll reconnect. Thank you.
Jada, the pleasure was 100% mine.
Thank you so much for your heart and attention and listening to Lead with Love. You can always get the links and resources mentioned in each episode over at leadwithlovepodcast.com so that you can build a sustainable business and live a creative life on your terms. If this message, Leading with Love, resonates with you and you want to take a stand for remembering that there are humans with beating hearts behind the numbers, I would love for you to subscribe so you never miss an episode and leave an honest review. It would mean the world to me, and it also helps more people spread more love in the world, which we really, really need. I also love hearing from you. So as you're listening, take a screenshot, share your favorite takeaway, and tag me on Instagram and Facebook at Jada Selner. I really appreciate you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.